7:01.
Well, you just said that live. So now everybody knows it's 7:01.
Everyone's going to know.
Thanks for letting everybody know that it's 7:01. Yeah. Let's give a round of applause for everybody watching at home, for everybody tuning in on YouTube live. Here's Allan Lichtman, folks.
And I can tell time.
And you can tell time. It's 7:01, and guess what?
We're live.
We're live. Last time you said we're here, we're on, but I guess it all means the same thing, right?
Pretty much.
Pretty much.
You're young and sharp. You know these things.
Who said that?
I did.
We've got 13 Keys tracker here. Joseph Pearson. President Belichick is here. Wow, I didn't know Belichick was president. Did you?
No. Wow.
What's up, President Belichick? They said, what's up? Big week in the news. Big week for a presidential historian. Am I right?
You know, it seems every week's a big week, but this one is pretty damn big.
Yeah. Let's get right into it then.
Yeah. We may see, and I think we're likely to see, the most significant indictment of Donald Trump among lots of significant indictments. I'm not downplaying any of the indictments. It's a big deal that he's endangered our national security by keeping critical national security documents in his bathroom, in his ballroom, where thousands of people come through.
Well, his bathroom might be private. That might be a good place to keep them.
I don't think bathrooms are locked. You know? I think anyone can get into a bathroom. And we even had some spilled on the floor. And, you know, the very fact that he did these things automatically compromises our national security because our military, our national security apparatus has got to assume that all of these secrets have been compromised. Otherwise, they're putting all of their operatives, all their plans at risk.
Okay, we know all this.
Yeah, what we're seeing now...
What are we seeing now, right?
...is he gets this target letter, which has to do with his attempt to undermine democracy by overturning the 2020 elections. He got a target letter, and the target letter outlined violating people's civil rights, conspiracy to defraud the U.S., witness tampering, very broad categories. And the special counsel is not limited to just any of those charges, nor does he have to charge Trump. But I think we're seeing charges that are going to come, and they are going to be explosive because they are going to expose the way in which, after more than 200 years, Donald Trump was the first president to try to impede what is the basis of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power, and undermine the will of the American people in an election, not to advance any principle, whether you disagree it or not, but just to keep himself in power. I suspect by next week, we're going to see the most explosive indictment, and it may not be the last, because they're still contemplating an indictment in Georgia.
Here's my thing about the January 6th stuff. We've seen a lot of it happen in person. We've had a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff come out, too. What else could come out in this that you think will shock the American people? Because it seems like no matter what comes out, no matter how much we've already seen, yeah, people are shocked. Yeah, it's crazy, but he's still moving ahead.
Well, he's only moving ahead with his own base. You know, here's the thing about Donald Trump. Go all the way back to when he started in 2015. All right, remember that? I
was a whippersnapper.
You were a whippersnapper, but you remember it. His approval rating in 8 years has not budged an inch. It's somewhere around 40%. You know, it fluctuates a little bit, but nothing changes his approval rating. And the problem for him, though, is he can't win at 40 to 42% in 2024. He's got to expand the base. And I guarantee to you, I don't know everything that Jack Smith knows, but I think maybe not in the indictment, because he's not going to, reveal all his cards, but certainly in the trial, there are going to be things that are going to shock us that we don't know about, and they may have to do with this scheme to present fake electors as if they were legitimate electors of the states. You know, for 100 years, conservatives have been haranguing us, right, about states' rights. We've got to respect the rights of the states
You've been
and not
around-
override that.
You've been around for 100 years?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Close. Approximately.
Okay.
And here they are overriding the laws and results of the states. We kind of know a little bit about it, but I think the details are going to be shocking. And I think what also will be shocking is the extent to which Trump himself is responsible for all these horrible things we've seen in the awful insurrection that hurt over 100 policemen that directly or indirectly resulted in 5 deaths, the attempt to subvert our democracy. I think the shocking thing will be how directly Trump is involved in it. You know, Michael Cohen might have been one of my students because he went to American University.
Right.
But I don't
That's
remember
true.
him, to tell you the truth.
Oh, okay. Dang.
But he said, look, Trump is like a mob boss. He doesn't directly give orders. He speaks, you know, kind of elliptically around the bush. But all of his followers and all of his employees know exactly what he means. So when he says, come and it will be wild, you got to fight like hell for your country, they all know that wasn't just a kumbaya, hold hands, peaceful kind of demonstration. And time and again, the small fry that had been brought into court and prosecuted have said, yeah, we were here because Donald Trump summoned us. Crystal clear to anyone who knows anything about Donald Trump. The other thing that's, I think, really important for people to know, and this has been so misleading in all the commentary.
Okay.
You know, did Trump genuinely believe he lost the election? 100% irrelevant for 2 reasons. Whether he genuinely believed it or not, that does not give him the right to commit crimes. Remember O.J. Simpson? You're too young for.
That I'm definitely too young
Yeah.
for, yeah.
Well, he genuinely believed these people stole his memorabilia. And so he broke into their hotel room to try to steal it back. He genuinely thought they took it, but that did not give him the right to commit a crime. And he got sentenced to 10 years in prison. Whatever Donald Trump thought or didn't think, that did not give him the right to commit crimes. Secondly, you know, ever hear of Zen Buddhism?
Heard of it.
Yeah. One of the most critical elements of Zen Buddhism is to rethink things, unask the question. When it comes to what Donald Trump genuinely believed, unask the question. That is irrelevant for Donald Trump. He doesn't operate in the same world as you and I,
Right.
or our audience, in terms of what is true and what is false. That's irrelevant for Trump. What does Trump only care about?
Himself.
Himself. What is good for him and what isn't good for him. Not what is true and not what is false. We saw that at the very beginning of his administration when his aides, talked about alternative facts. Well, Donald Trump lives in a no-fact zone, just in his transactional zone entirely.
Okay. As people might have realized as watching our streams, as we talk about, I'm a little bit of a skeptic in terms of all these indictments, all these things are going to take down Trump, because often talks in circles or in ways that are to be interpreted. So I fear, or I believe, that this January 6th thing may be more of the same.
That's possible. That's possible. But again, we don't know what Jack Smith knows.
Sure. But again, people have said that about the Ukraine blackmail. People said that about the Russian
But this is
correlation.
different.
Oh, why?
Because he's got to defend himself in court. And he's got to do it in federal court, where he's going to have a no-nonsense judge. He's not going to have a judge who's in his pocket. And a jury that, this D.C. jury, it's not going to be a jury that's just ready to whitewash whatever Donald Trump did or didn't do. Let me also say, there could be other charges, like wire fraud. I'm astounded that his, middle-class, struggling financially followers are willing to send money to a billionaire to try to fund a defense which he's perfectly capable of funding by himself. If he's fraudulently funding, that is another crime as well.
Incent Waterfall says, I agree with Mr. Lichtman. Which Mr. Lichtman? Me or him? We're both Mr. Lichtman.
Yeah, but you're the junior.
I'm the junior, but he could be talking to, you're technically Dr. Lichtman, so maybe he's talking about me.
Maybe so.
Here's another.
Highly unlikely, but you never know.
Highly unlikely. So I think he agrees with you. Okay, if people agree with him, that's fine. You know, I'm a little bit more skeptical just because
That's
I
fine.
feel like we've seen this happen over and over.
Here's
and
the difference.
Okay.
You can't bull your way through a trial. Donald Trump can bluster. He can huff and he can puff, but he can't blow the courthouse down. In a trial, you've got to present not alternative facts, but proven facts. And frankly, in looking at all, I'm not going to comment too much in this case. I don't know exactly what it is or what the evidence. All we know is he's had a charging letter. But take the case of the national security breach. What is his defense? He's been all over the map. He said, the FBI planted them. He said, I had a right to keep them. They're mine.
We've heard this all before. I know.
Right.
You've gone through this list. But what was his defense in the Ukraine stuff? What was his defense in the Eugene Carroll stuff? I mean,
He lost the Eugene Carroll
and it
case.
hasn't done anything.
Lost it big time.
And it hasn't affected his core base.
You're
at
not
all.
going to change his core base.
But here's another question for you. Okay, so let's address that first. The fact that he's had no defense 20 million times before, him having no defense this time isn't any different.
It's totally different.
Okay.
In the case of the impeachment, he had Republicans. You had to get 20 Republicans to convict him. That was never going to happen. Didn't matter what the evidence, what the case was, irrelevant. When you get into the criminal justice system and into a court of law, you don't have that same firewall that you had with Republicans in the Senate. They don't have to be objective. They don't have to be listen to the evidence like a jury has to. They don't get questions in voir dire like members of the jury do. They can just vote their politics. I can't stress too much to your audience, our audience, how different it is to be in a court of law where you're facing criminal charges and possible imprisonment than anything else Trump has ever faced before. And let's not forget, too, he may have to spend all his time, instead of on the campaign trail, sitting in court. He didn't have to go to the Eugene Carroll case because it was a civil case.
Right.
But in a criminal case, he's got to be there. And these cases can take weeks, and there could be 4 of them before the election. So all of his time may be tied up between now and Election Day. I just saw the latest poll, and I'm not a big poll guy, but it just came out this morning. It's not predictive, but it showed for the first time in a general election matchup, Biden was ahead beyond the margin of error. It was 49 to 44, and it was one of the better polls. Either I think it was Quinnipiac or Monmouth. One of the more objective polls.
Oops. I hear what you're saying, and I do acknowledge this is different. I guess I just don't know if it's different enough to affect his political career to the point where we're saying Trump is no longer a force of nature.
I never said that.
So then why does it matter if he's still going to be as powerful as he's always been?
He's not going to be as powerful.
And here's what I'm going to say. I know his polling numbers are low. I know Biden's beating him, et cetera, et cetera. As you say, you're not a big fan of the polls. A couple key, you haven't made any call either way in the keys.
No, I haven't.
But a couple keys shake here, a couple keys shake there, either way, whatever. And who knows? We could have a President Trump again, regardless of how many times he's been indicted, regardless
I don't disagree with that. It is certainly conceivable, depending upon the keys, that you could have I hate to say it because I think it could be the end of our democracy. And Trump has made no bones that he is going to, if he's elected again, is going to govern as an authoritarianism. He's even said publicly, openly, that, we can just disregard the Constitution.
Right. So I guess my whole stance in all of this is, yeah, it's all bad, but I see no evidence that it's bad enough yet, or that it's different enough yet to say
agree.
Trump
but he hasn't been in court yet. We haven't actually seen the evidence unfold in a courtroom. And let me tell you, I've been in 110 courtrooms, and it's a very, very different situation than just hearing things on the media. Plus, he hasn't been convicted of anything yet. So he can say, I've done nothing wrong, it's perfect. But you slam a felony conviction for a serious crime, who knows how that may change the mix.
I keep switching to the black screen. I'm sorry, everybody. Why don't you look into the camera? That's what I'm wondering right now. You keep looking over here. That's the camera right there.
I like looking at you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This Michigan fake electors thing that's going on now, I believe
Yes, 16 fake electors
Right.
have been indicted in Michigan.
We know
and whatever
that.
evidence the Michigan Attorney General has generated, Jack Smith can use. And because I do think part of the indictment that I think will come down in the next week or so will include the fake electors scheme. And they've interviewed a lot of folks, and I don't know what all the evidence is, but I'm willing to bet, to save their own hides, a lot of these folks are going to say, we were following orders from Donald Trump.
But people have said that before, and it doesn't seem to do much.
But this is now a court of law, and Donald Trump has to present evidence to refute that. He just can't call this a witch hunt. He's called, what is he called, Jack Smith? A crackhead, deranged, a psycho. Jack Smith is about as straight up a guy as you can get. His career prosecutor with a long, distinguished record.
One thing you have to give Trump, he's really good at coming up with short, simple, and funny nicknames for his opponents.
He's really, really good at that. He hasn't come up with one for me yet, but we'll see.
I think he still sort of likes you because you predicted him in 2016.
Yeah, I still have that letter from him congratulating me for predicting his win.
Yep.
He knows I'm objective.
There's been some rumblings that in the House, McCarthy's going to lead a Republican movement to expunge or erase Trump's impeachment, past impeachments. Have you read about that at all?
Yeah, I've heard about that. McCarthy has kind of been reluctant to come out one way or another and say they are going to do that. But, as soon as the Democrats, if and when they retake the House, they'll just put it back in.
You think there's going to be this back and forth of Republicans taking it out, Democrats putting it back in?
It could be. I don't see how that benefits Republicans because it just puts more and more attention and emphasis on the impeachment.
That's fair, but it expunges it for at least the time being.
For the time being.
So he can say, at least for this presidential election, he might be able to say, oh, I've never technically been impeached.
No one's going to believe that. Come on. Except, again, his 40%. And I stress, his 40% may not crack, but he's got to get beyond that. Plus, let's say it cracks 5%, he's finished.
I hear that, but as you predict, as your whole system says, a few things beyond Trump's orbit change.
Absolutely, that is true. But here's the thing. My keys have been right for 40 years, but they are based on history. And, every 4 years someone comes up and says, oh, but you got to change your keys because we have a African American running, we might have a woman running, we have the new social media. And I say, no. The keys are robust. They were developed going all the way back to 1860. But, and I'm not saying this is true, if we have a presidential candidate convicted of multiple felonies, is that so much of a break in history that it could override the keys even if they show a bad situation for the incumbents? I don't know. He hasn't been convicted of anything yet, and of course, we still have the presumption of innocence, but he's got a lot to reckon with.
So Alex Shim says there was no insurrection charge against Trump, which there should have been in this commenter's opinion. What do you think? Do you think the charges were accurate? Do you think there should have been more or less? What do you think?
I think there should be that he violated the Insurrection Act. I think, as you say, they may be reluctant to do that because of the elliptical way in which Donald Trump speaks. Is it enough to say, we'll be wild, fight like hell to defend your country? But he also throws in, as he always does, a little escape hatch, a half sentence, be peaceful. So, that may be a little bit dubious, and that may be why they're not directly charging him with inciting an insurrection, although they could. They're not limited to what's in the charging document. And moreover, they can add charges right up to trial.
Joseph Pearson says he's curious about demographic changes. More boomers have died since Trump was elected in 2016. More Gen Z voters are in the electorate. Can these demographics impact Trump's political career, his base, or your keys even?
No, again, my keys go back to 1860. Think of the changes since 1860. Women didn't vote. Only a tiny handful of African Americans voted. Your ancestors from Eastern Europe weren't even here yet.
Right.
We had an agricultural economy, no automobiles, no planes, no poles, thank goodness, no computers. So, the keys, as I keep saying, is very robust. They've held through, much bigger changes in American life and society than we've just seen in the last few years. That's why I don't on the fly change the keys.
H.V. Bart asks, assuming the southern border crisis is as bad as Republicans are making it out to be, could that flip the foreign policy failure key?
Doesn't look that way. In fact, border crossings are down. The big invasion that everyone was expecting hasn't occurred. Could things change in the next year and a quarter or so? Absolutely. That's why I keep saying I've made no prediction yet. The situation is very fluid. I'm not going to make a prediction until the economic keys, the two of them, and the two foreign policy keys fall in place. By the way, I think someone asked me last time about a student who set up an interactive 13 keys.
That's correct.
It's up.
It's up.
Google interactive 13 keys. It's very good. I
Yes.
commend the student. He quotes me a lot, and I'm a little dubious, about these quick quotes from me because they can easily be misinterpreted. They're part of a much bigger analysis. So keep in mind when you look at that I've made no prediction yet, and a lot of the keys are still fluid.
And I spoke to him too, and yeah, he's a good person, and he's in the chat right now. So hello, 13 Keys Tracker.
Yeah, I commend you. It was really great.
So here's an interesting question from Ben England. If Trump is not the nominee but runs third party, is there an exception to the third party key, since that would be a split in the Republican Party?
Great question. And it's covered in my book. Got to read my book, Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House 2020. Next year we'll have the 2024, which I think is the 8th or 9th edition of the book. And I'm very clear on that. Third parties count against the party holding the White House unless they are a clear split in the opposition party, which almost never happens. It would be unprecedented for Trump to run a third party. But does Trump care about precedent?
Of course.
Oh, yeah, he's a big follower.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, of history, precedent, tradition. So it could happen. I don't expect it to happen, but with Trump, you never know.
Okay, Entertainment Vending asks, I have a hypothetical question. There are now multiple polls showing that if Joe Manchin were to enter the presidential race, he's polling at over 10%. Would that be enough to turn the third party key?
It might be, but it's way too early to assess a third party. Biden hasn't even been nominated yet. And there's this tendency, people to say, oh, I really want someone other than Biden. But once Biden becomes the nominee, that changes.
What about you? You could run.
I'm too old.
Oh.
No,
Biden's older than you, yeah.
I guess I could run. You can't.
Darn.
Yep.
What do you think of Cornel West?
Spoiler. Someone who has no hope of getting anywhere, but if he gets any traction and turns the third party key, that could elect Donald Trump. I don't understand these folks who want to run as a third party. All they can do is help the election of Donald Trump and lead to the destruction of our democracy. I don't care how good your ideas are. I don't care how wonderful you are. Don't do it. Don't facilitate the election of Trump or a Trump ally if it's someone else in the Republican Party.
But theoretically, shouldn't there be just sort of this standard in America that anybody can run? I mean, this idea that you shouldn't run seems a little bit kind of counter to the whole idea of American democracy.
Not really. I'm not saying you can't run. I'm saying every decision has to be weighed in terms of its impact. Decisions have consequences. And I'm saying if you're worried about our democracy under a Donald Trump second presidency, then you should go on a ballot and help him get elected.
Shriyam asks, which president historically secured most of the 13 keys?
Theodore Roosevelt in 2004.
So what?
Theodore Roosevelt.
In 2004?
In 1904.
Okay.
Excuse me. Senior moment.
Yeah, I caught you on that one.
I'm glad you're young and
caught
sharp.
him on that one.
Secured all the keys.
Right.
The only time that ever happened. FDR came close, but Theodore Roosevelt is still the champ. And, he was running against an absolute nobody. Nobody ever remembers.
Can you explain in more detail how key 6 was true in 2016?
Which key is that?
That's a good question. Let's see.
I don't have the numbers.
You're supposed to be the expert, aren't you? Let's see.
Yeah, but
entertain the people while I look this up. Dad, you. Okay, key 6. Strong long-term economy. The long-term economy key in 2016.
That's just a calculation. You look at the 2-year record, the record of the incumbency, and then the previous 2 administrations, which had, of course, the horrible recession of 2008, 2009. And so the calculation was that real per capita growth was greater in the second Obama term than the previous 2 terms.
Okay, HV Bart has now asked this question, I think, 4 times. So I'm going to go ahead and ask it to you.
4 times?
Yeah.
That must be a really important question.
Let's see. They say, I get how the BLM riots in 2020 turned key number 8 against Trump. But why didn't the BLM riots/protests during President Obama's second term during the summers of 2014/2016 turn key 8 against Clinton?
They weren't nearly as significant as they were during the Trump term. And Trump contributed to that. He threw gasoline on the fire of those protests by attacking them, diminishing them, saying they were a huge threat to the nation. We didn't have anything remotely like that in Obama's second term.
People are asking about foreign policy key in terms of Ukraine, in terms of Afghanistan. I
haven't called the foreign policy keys yet.
Well, you haven't called any keys yet.
Well, I've called a few that are obvious. If Biden runs again,
right, of course, right,
you win the incumbency and the party contest key.
Sure.
Democrats have already lost the midterm elections key.
Right.
Biden has already won the policy change key. He's already lost the incumbent charisma key. So some of the keys have turned, but enough of them are still uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine. That's still up in the air. I haven't called that yet. And I don't think Afghanistan will ultimately turn out to be a major foreign policy failure. I think it'll be largely forgotten by the election year, but let's see.
People are saying you already called the foreign policy key.
I have not.
Oh, you got wrong information, folks. He has not.
You know, as I said, be really careful of, you know, people either taking snippets of what I said or, you know, paraphrasing or claiming I said something. I have not called the foreign policy keys. I have not called the economic keys. And of course, you know, scandal could erupt at any time. Social unrest can erupt at any time. So far, I don't see that. But again, we need to wait and see. So can't say this too many times. A lot of keys I haven't called. I have made no prediction to this point.
All right, if you're out there saying he's made predictions, we'll clip this and say he has not.
What I have said is having Biden run puts the Democrats in the best possible position to win because it secures the incumbency key and the nomination key. If he does, and that would mean 6 more keys would have to fall to predict his loss. If he doesn't run, they lose those 2 keys, and only 4 more keys would have to fall. It's not a prediction. It's just an indication of the fact that Biden running puts the Democrats in the best position to win.
Is there something to be said in terms of Afghanistan that while it might have been a failure, it was such a popular decision in terms of getting out that it won't be a failure in terms of foreign policy? Is that it?
I think that's right. The American people understand we had to get out. They didn't want to continue to battle in Afghanistan. And mostly it was a failure of optics. You know, overall, they were pretty successful in getting people out. Some people were killed by a suicide bomber, but, you know, how do you defend against a suicide bomber? You know, that happens all over the world. And the press coverage was just abysmal. You know, I guess the press was trying to prove, you know, we can be just as hard on Biden as we can be hard on Trump. And, you know, it was just very, very misleading. But I don't think it's going to be a big issue come
what do you think
2024.
What do you think was misleading about the media coverage of Afghanistan?
Well, they focused on, you know, these individual failures. You know, I recall, here's an interpreter who didn't get out. Well, it turns out he did get out eventually. And, you know, they focused on the chaos. Well, evacuations are always chaotic, particularly when you're doing it in a very hostile, dangerous environment, and they didn't put it in any kind of perspective.
How does the evacuation of Afghanistan compare to Vietnam and Saigon?
Vietnam was much worse,
really,
than it was in absolutely.
Okay, let's see. What about January 6th incident? Will that go against Trump? Well,
it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
The way the keys work is they gauge the prospects for the party holding the White House. And only 1 key out of 13 pertains to the challengers, and that is, it asks, is the challenger one of these once-in-a-generation, broadly inspirational, charismatic figures like Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan? And, of course, none of the Republican contenders are. You know, Ron DeSantis is Mr. Anti-Charisma. And Trump does have a certain appeal, but as we've discussed, it's appeal to a narrow segment of the electorate. It's not like Reagan, who had this broad appeal. You know, there are lots of Reagan Democrats. We don't hear a whole lot about Trump Democrats.
Now, this is something that just popped into my head. Is it actually better that all these things are happening to Trump in terms of his legal woes while he's not in power? Because
it would be a big scandal. Yeah,
it would be a big scandal. It would turn a key against him. Maybe even multiple keys of other cards.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that he's out of power. He didn't win the charisma key even before any of these indictments.
I'm not talking about
his appeal was too narrow.
I'm not talking about specifically the charisma key. I'm saying it's to Trump's advantage based on your system that these things are happening while he's not in power because they don't affect the keys.
Correct. That's correct.
Right. I mean,
they do not affect the keys. But as I said, you know, if you have a president convicted of a candidate for president convicted of multiple felonies, you know, can that break the pattern of history? Because it's so outside what we've ever seen, even remotely, in this country. So that. Here's another possibility. Trump wins the nomination and then afterwards gets convicted of multiple felonies. Would the Republican National Committee remove him as the nominee and maybe put someone else in their place? I'm not an expert on internal Republican rules, but I think they have that power.
Obama Soda, recurring viewer, what's up, Obama Soda, says that the Democrats have the upper hand this time because they have the incumbency key. So it goes both ways. It's to Trump's advantage that he's not in power because all these scandals can't turn keys against them. But then again, Democrats are in power. They have the incumbency key, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. The worst situation for the incumbent party is an open seat and a party contest, like we saw for the Democrats in 2016, right? When you had an open seat in the big contest between Clinton and Bernie Sanders, or we saw for the Republicans in 2008, or for the Republicans in 1976 when you had the big contest between, well, it wasn't an open seat, but you had a big contest between Ford and Reagan. It's bad news. Or 1952, when Truman stepped away and you had a big contest for who would be his successor. Bad situation.
We've got Andrew in the chat. What's up, Andrew? He's been a long-time viewer. He's wondering about what happened in 2000, the fact that you can only call the popular vote. Do you want to set the record straight about what happened in 2000, how that changed things or didn't change things?
I don't want to relitigate 2000. I've written about this extensively.
Okay.
2000 was a stolen election based on the actual intent of the voters in Florida. Gore won Florida and should have won the presidency. But what happened was in Florida, 1 out of every 9 or 10 African Americans who voted had their ballots invalidated. These are not people who prevented from voting. These are people who voted. If you lined up 9 or 10 African Americans who voted, you'd pull one out and say, sorry, your vote didn't count, compared to 1 out of 50 whites. If the rejection rate for African Americans had just been the same as for whites, not zero, more than 40,000 African Americans would have had their ballots counted. Gore would have won overwhelmingly, and other political scientists have since backed up my findings. You can look it up. I did a report for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. It's still on their website, or you can look up my 2003 article in the Journal of Legal Studies.
There you go. All right, we have been going for 38 minutes, so I think we're about to wrap it up. Do you have any final words for the people out there, Dad?
Yeah, my final word is we don't know yet what Jack Smith is going to charge Donald Trump with. Don't take the charging letter too literally. And we don't know what evidence he has. The January 6th committee in Congress amassed a huge amount of evidence. But keep in mind, a prosecutor has much stronger tools for gathering evidence than a congressional committee. He can get people thrown in jail for contempt much more easily than you can do from Congress. So keep your eye on what actually will come out, presuming, nothing's 100%, but I'd say it's over 90% you're going to get an indictment. Keep in mind to watch what's actually in the indictment and what evidence is presented to back it up. But also keep in mind when you get to the trial, lots more evidence is going to be presented. The prosecutor is not going to tip his hand on everything that he has when it comes to trial.
All right, people. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like to stream, please subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you know that we're live. If you like us, share our YouTube page with your friends, your family. We enjoy having everybody in the chat. We just enjoy discussing with you all. Thank you for watching.